Hey, I'm Decathlon Gamer, and welcome to my way too early predictions for the F1 2022 season. These predictions are going to be based on what has transpired over the last couple weeks in car reveals. Now, of course, at this stage, many content creators have put out some sort of ranking on liveries, as we've seen all but one of the official liveries at this stage. And I put out one of those videos as well already, utilizing Alfa Romeo's false, unofficial camouflage livery and to complete that lineup. But that video is already out. For this one, though, yes, I am going to make the very, very bold predictions. Now, I will be updating these after we get through practice, after we've seen more of the cars, how they perform, what sort of information we have, to then go from there and make season predictions more along the lines of drivers' standings. But today I will make a constructors prediction as to where these teams will be. First off, there's a lot that we don't know, which is why these videos really haven't started coming out yet. We know very, very little about the rear ends of these cars. We've had a few images of a couple teams, but that's about it. Of course, we're in an entirely new era, so things are going to be different, substantially different. We know virtually nothing, or very, very little, about the undertray, about the floor of these cars. We don't know much about the suspension, how the suspension will work for each individual team. We don't know how these cars are going to be with tire wear. We have new wheels, new tires, new rims. I mean, that whole setup is going to be different. Also, the tire blanket, they're backing off on the temperature this year. So there are a lot of factors that are going to change how these cars behave with their tires and how drivers are going to adjust and try to handle that. So there's a lot of unknowns. There are some things we do know. We have a cost cap era. We know what kind of budget these teams traditionally work under and how many of them are going to meet the maximum end of what they're allowed to do and how many are still going to come up short. We know what type of infrastructure these teams have. We know what type of team management or the size of the teams themselves in terms of personnel. We know what the driver lineups are. And we know that starting this year, we've been seeing tunnel time given based on constructors' performance in the past. But now that we've had these car reveals, we also have an idea about a few more things. And that's why we saw kind of our first predictions based on the don't knows and the do knows. But now that there's an idea, I'm taking that to that next stage. Now that we've seen a little bit, here's some things that we do have an idea on. The upper floor. We do know what's going on with the side pods. We know what type of packaging each team has gone with. And it's substantially different team to team. We also know what's under the hood is there's a freeze, thanks to Honda, with the engines. Now there's going to be some changes, especially around packaging, but we still have a fairly decent idea of who's got the horsepower and who doesn't. From these first images, in particular around push rod, pull rod, we have a tiny bit of an idea about what's going on with the suspension. We have a small idea over what's going on with the front wings, though I wouldn't take much from that one. But one big one is we have a really clear picture on what sort of drag each team might be facing this season, as in what's going to hold them back. Through that combination, through all those images, whether it was shakedown or just car reveals in the showroom, we do know a little bit about that overall aerodynamics packaging. And that is how we're going to make these early predictions. According to the designers who put the F1, now 2022 instead of 2021, car design together, 10% of the overall downforce, just 10% is going to go to the front wings. Also, the front wings, of course, are variable, race by race, track by track, depending on what the teams need. So what we saw on the cars in the reveals, not going to take that too seriously. The rear wing, on the other hand, is going to account for a lot more downforce than what you're getting from the front wings. And that is estimated to be around 25%. We haven't seen very many images of the rear ends themselves and how they're going to impact things. And the rear wings are very much strict by the rules, and the teams have virtually identical rear wings, or at least as far as the eye can tell. And therefore, it's going to be more about how air flows to the rear wings than what's going on at the rear end itself. So I won't be looking at the rear end, but I will be looking how air flows to the rear end. The big one, and probably the big reason why it's still way too early to really do a proper prediction at this stage, the floors, the underbelly. It's 65% of the downforce in this era. It is the bulk, and it is also that primary reason why they're supposed to be a lot more racy than they've been through this previous generation. They're supposed to be able to follow a lot closer, and the bulk of the downforce coming from underneath the car is why that is happening. That's the biggest reason. Yes, the dirty air coming off the cars, it's going to have an impact on how things behave. Whether the teams followed the rules as they set out, or whether they found loopholes and they're going to create more dirty air and give less of an advantage compared to what we had, who's to say? I'm guessing they probably will. Because of the bulk of the downforce is coming from underneath the car, it's not going to be that big of a deal. And they will be able to race more closely. Guaranteed. And the underbody is hugely important because of that 65% of downforce. But we know very little at this point. We know about how air will enter in underneath because most of the shots give you just enough to see that front side. We'll be looking at that because that's going to be hugely important. But that's where I can. I can't look at it everywhere. We don't have great detailed images. And that could really, really shake things up down the road because that's going to have a bigger impact than what we have seen visually thus far. So at best, all this stuff that we're looking at, from the side pods to the upper tray on the floor to what sort of drag they have, all of this thrown together may account for 40% of the overall downforce. Meaning, it's going to be important, right? If one team really has that down well and one team doesn't, even if the other end is good, the other 60% is really good, I doubt they're going to make up substantial ground on somebody who over the first 40%, the first 2/5 of their downforce is solid. Based on that, I think it is okay to make some predictions. Now, do I know for sure that this is all going to work out? Well, no. Here's my background. I'm just an F1 fan, just a content creator. I do not know everything. I'm not an engineer. What I do have is a degree in history and a master's in education. I know how to see the big picture. I know how to put pieces together. And as a teacher, I know how to analyze things and then dictate that to others and help them understand. So I have a way of looking at things that at least brings a unique perspective. Doesn't make me an expert. This is a prediction anyway. And this is a prediction based on very limited evidence. I'll do my best with it. You very much might not agree, but go ahead, leave comments below on where you think I've gone wrong, where you think I've missed, or what you think alternatively. While we might only be seeing 40% of downforce overall, and in some cases with some of these teams, we're probably looking at maybe 20-25% of what they have in terms of downforce. So definitely not big picture, small picture. But one thing that we really see a lot of clearly from here is what sort of drag these cars are going to create. How much slower are they making themselves by that object cutting through the air? And for that one, it's going to be one of the key elements of my predictions, because that one you're seeing the vast majority of the drag that exists already present on the cars. So you can get a pretty good picture of how much slower they're going to be. And because we already know the engine capabilities of these teams, well, then you know how that plus drag is going to at least cover your straight line speed for the most part. And then we've got a little bit of an idea of what's going on with the aerodynamics, meaning how well they're going to get through those corners. And from that, you can just about piece things together on how these teams might do. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the rankings, going from, well, worst to first. Let's start with my prediction for 10th place, and that is Alfa Romeo. Now, for me, 8th, 9th, and 10th, I think are going to be pretty close to each other. I'm thinking we're looking at a back three, but not the same back three that we saw in 2021. I think what we're looking at is Alfa Romeo first and foremost. And here's why I think that. Over previous years, this is the team that has been dealing with the smallest budget. And that's continued to be a thing. Now, they had a small increase in that budget, and they saw some benefit from that, but they never climbed that high. They just got into the midfield, and it took them a lot of years to get there. They started the era well behind these other teams, and I have a feeling that based on that organization, based on the retirement of Kimi Räikkönen, I have a feeling that we're looking at a team that's going to be hitting reset again and playing catch up. The car looks very basic in the images that we've seen of it. It doesn't have a lot going on. It's got large side pods. It's pretty boxy. It's not looking too solid. And I think just based on the little guys that can catch up in time and make gains, they're going to need time to catch up and make gains. Moving on to number 9, Aston Martin. And I hate to say this one because I think they were certainly aiming to get into the top 4 or 5 this year. I think they had high hopes, but I think they've gotten it horribly wrong. I think this is the one team that you look at and you go, oh no, no. This isn't going to work. And it's in their packaging. It's horribly boxy. The side pods are massive. Also, recently parting ways with Omar Zafnauer, that had something to do with the car. Maybe it didn't, but that's where my mind went, especially after seeing it upon reveal. I think this is a team that's going to be well behind everybody else. And I think where they might just be ahead of Alfa Romeo, come the start of the season, they might be last. But as the season goes on, I think they'll pick up on some things that other teams have done, something they're known for doing anyway, right? Pink Mercedes. I think they are capable of progressing more quickly than Alfa Romeo, and I think that they could struggle to see points this season. I think Alfa Romeo could struggle to see points this season. At least that's my prediction. But I think Aston Martin has the resources, has the ability to develop as the season goes on, and I think they'll at least get ahead of Alfa Romeo by the end of the season, maybe one spot higher. And that other team, 8th, AlphaTauri. First off, this is a B team that absolutely serves its A team. They have gone through the Honda switch a year early to prepare things for Red Bull. They have tried things out. They have sacrificed numerous races in recent years to try things out, to see how they worked. Yes, for their own benefit, but more so for the benefit of Red Bull. And I really saw these last 2 seasons a huge development push by AlphaTauri and Red Bull to make their cars better. And we saw AlphaTauri all the way up to 3rd quickest for a fairly decent chunk of last year. That's going to come with a cost. Now, they have the infrastructure, they have the ability to grow and develop, which is why I think they'll easily be ahead of Alfa Romeo. And based on philosophy, The car looks very basic. Looks like it has not had a ton of time put into it. Looks like it's pretty much, here's the regs, we're going to follow the regs, and then go from there. One other thing that stands out as a worrying sign for me with all that collaboration between AlphaTauri and Red Bull is that the Alfa has gone with pushrod, while the Red Bull has gone with a pull rod. They can't even figure out which direction to go with that they're having both teams try something opposite to see which works better. That to me is a hint of an incomplete job, of a job yet to be finished. And I think that's going to cost AlphaTauri dearly this season, and I think they're going to shuffle towards the back, yet again, a place that they normally are. As we get further into this era, I think they're going to progress up the midfield again. But for now, I see them back in 8th. That brings us to 7th on our list, and that's where we go with Haas. Limited team, limited resources, growing their infrastructure, but that's something that takes time. Yes, the Ferrari engine is definitely improved, and they spent the most time of any team in the design of the new car. But that was still done on a limited basis. That was still done with a smaller team. That is still going to net less of a result. I do think it is enough to get them into the midfield. I do like the fairly sleek design of this car. However, there's one concern that I see. It's not that boxy compared to some of the others, and I think that's one reason why they'll probably be fairly well clear, and I think they will score points this season. But I worry a little bit about how the side pods go out and back in at a very circular, very tight angle. Now, the reason why I worry about that, A, that width still gives you a bit of drag. B, that curvature. Now, this air that's moving, and again, I'm not an aerodynamicist, but picked up a lot on kind of how things work. You want this air to move, and you want to keep it locked in on the side of the car because you eventually want to get that off the rear wing. You're going to get a lot of air lost on a tight curve like that, meaning it's going to get lost out the sides. You're possibly going to create wake on your rear tires. Maybe not, but possibly. But even if it doesn't, even if it just escapes out the side, that air is not being returned to create additional downforce on the rear wing. So I think the Haas is a step in the right direction compared to those teams placed 8th, 9th, and 10th. But I still think that they're only partway there. And compared to the rest of the teams, they're just going to be stuck playing catch up a lot. Also, a team that has a history of really struggling to get tires in these last few seasons anyway, really struggled to get their tires in a working range. And that is something that's going to be significantly harder this year. Hopefully that's something that they do not struggle with. As an American, I'm certainly rooting for them. Not that it's one of my favorite teams or anything, but I'd like to see them succeed, especially after the difficult times that they've had the last couple of years in particular. That being said, I still think they're going to fall in 7th. Maybe a little bit off the rest of the midfield, maybe a little bit ahead of the back 3. In 6th, this year I see the Williams team. Car looks really well designed. This is the first car that I think has a legitimate shot of being pretty quick. But with the recent takeover, that's probably delayed some progress. Remember, a lot of these teams have been working on this for years already. 2 years especially. Majority of their work has gone into this car. But with a Mercedes engine, 2 decent drivers, growing infrastructure, an improving team, a hungry team, I think they'll definitely get into that midfield battle. But I don't see them beating out the big teams. And therefore, they're kind of a best of the outsiders this year. It definitely, of the 5 we've seen so far, it, with the Haas not far behind it, definitely seem to be the two that are onto something. Now, this is probably the controversial one, and this is probably the one that I'm going to have the most wrong. But based on what I've seen so far, and in this case, it's ridiculously little. This is the one we've seen, well, the least about, and that's Red Bull. Yes, I have Red Bull down in 5th. Okay, first off, and this is the big reason, they've spent 2 years focused on getting that 2021 championship. Regardless of how you feel about that championship, whether you agree with it or not, whether you celebrated it or hated it, they came away, at least with the drivers, they came away with the car very capable and should have won the Constructors. It was the quickest car the majority of the season. More than half means the title should have been theirs. Constructors, that is. It wasn't, but they put a ton of work over those last 2 years into that car. Now, unlimited resources, you still turn around and go, hey, they're not going to be worse than 3rd, right? They couldn't be. But with this cost cap era, there's only so much time. They spent more than any other team still working on their 2021 car, their 2020 car. That has to hurt. The car, from what we've seen, looks pretty basic. There's not much going on there. You don't have the extra bits and bobs on a lot. Now, those can go horribly wrong, but all those little extra aero pieces, there's nothing like that on what we've seen from the Red Bull. It looks very much here's the rule set, and here is what we're following. They've got Alfa doing different things than what they're doing, which means they're going to be trying stuff out. Now, that's not to say that Red Bull's not going to get faster and faster and faster as the year goes on, but I think they're going to be playing catch up. I think they're going to be playing copy and paste a lot. I think Alfa is going to experiment a ton. Red Bull's going to adopt what works. Not only in the Alfa, but what they see in the front 2 or 3 teams. I think Red Bull is going to take a step back. Now, are they capable of winning races? I think they absolutely could win a race or two this season, late. But I don't think they're going to challenge early on. I don't think they're going to see too many podiums early on. But like I said, I could be completely wrong about that. But from what I've seen of the car and what I've seen of the last 2 years, I'm worried about their early state. Give them a season, they'll be fine. They'll be fighting for the championship in a year or two again. I just don't think they're going to be there this year, or at least not the first half of the year anyway. Up to 4th, the Great Experiment, Ferrari. They have more drag with those wide side pods. It also sits higher than the other teams. Now, the Valley, the Great Valley Experiment that they are running, they've stated gives them 7% better aerodynamics. I believe them. But 7% better than what is a very important question. The way their engine is packaged creates a ton of drag. Slows the car down a lot. It's a big box, like the Aston Martin. Let's use that as an example. It's similar in size. The Valley is going to scoop that air down. It's going to feed the engine with the inlets that they have. But then when it gets to the rear end of that, it's going to scoop that back up. And it's going to direct that air towards that rear wing. There's your 7%. However, I think the loss from the boxiness, from the massive size that you have on that Ferrari, I think what we're talking about is 7% better than Aston Martin, 7% better than the large Alfa Romeo, the medium size side pods that the Williams have. is going to have less drag. And remember, the majority of the aero is going to come under the car, not above it. And they're allowed 4 inlets that they're able to put to direct air. Ferrari put one of those on the outer part of the floor, which means they're going to have less control over the flow of air under the body of the floor. That's where 65% of your aero comes from. So while you might have 7% more over the top, 2/3 of your airflow, your aerodynamics, is going to be under. And they are taking away from that. How much so? I don't know. Might be marginal. Maybe they found that they're losing 2% here and gaining 7% there. Either way, I think the increased drag over the massive size, I think it's going to hurt them more than it helps them. Plus, notably, that engine, a little bit off. Just a little bit off compared to the others. So for that, I think Ferrari might have some elements that are copied by others. Boy, oh boy, it's a beautiful car. But a beautiful car does not win championships. It can, but the beauty has nothing to do with it. I think that drag, based on the massive size, is going to hold them back a little bit. And for that, just ahead of them, the Alpine. The Alpine is slim. The Alpine has a lot going on with the aerodynamics package. It looks like the airflow is going to be directed well. I do think that the Alpine is missing a little bit, like compared to the Ferrari, when it comes to directing air at the rear wing and getting the most out of that. It does look like they've got a lot going on, though, to try to direct air at the underbody. A lot. And for that, I think they're going to put up a decent fight, and they certainly could be capable of getting some wins this season. But I don't know. I don't know for sure. But I think the Alpine, they're going to try to get up there. I think they're shooting for the moon. I don't think they're going to reach the moon, but maybe they reach space, right? Progress, more competitive. I know they have some bold predictions, and they keep coming up short on those bold predictions in recent years, and maybe they do come up short again this year. But third's a good place. Podiums could be in hand for them. Brings us to the top 2, and if you couldn't tell from the direction we're going, and if you've already seen these cars, I think you might have an idea on which one I think is number 1. But in the 2 slot, McLaren. I think the McLaren could have a strong team, could have a handful of wins this season. This is a team that has worked really, really well since their restructuring over the last 4 to 5 years. I think they focused enough on the new car. They did not do much for upgrades over the last couple of seasons. And the car looks sleek. It looks like the airflow is going to be good. They're going to get that extra downforce on the rear wing. I think it's a very capable team with the budget, the infrastructure, everything that could come together and make them very competitive. I think also they were pretty humble about the way that they were talking preseason, but suggesting, hey, we're going to be upper midfield. Well, I think they are going to be upper midfield. Now, I know a lot of people will hate to hear this one, but in the number 1 slot, of course, is Mercedes. It is crazy sleek. It is insane how tightly they packaged that engine. And for that, there is miles and miles of distance between them and literally every other team in how little drag they're going to have compared to everybody else. And they already are very fast on the straights. They already have an excellent engine under the hood. And of course, they have been the best run team through this previous era. You throw all those pieces together, and you throw in the fact that 2 years ago, they were focused almost entirely on the new car. They had those innovations that they entered the season with, and they ran with them. They had to remove some of that stuff, but they had no upgrades in 2020. They just took the same car out and went through the season. Other teams closed the gap on them as the season went on, but they did what they had to do. They won the championship. 2021, they found they had some problems at the start of the season with all the rule changes that were forced upon them. They didn't do much to adapt to it. Early on, they made a couple upgrades, and then of course they did one more key upgrade at the midpoint of the season, and that got them into that competitive range they needed to get that Constructors Championship again. And yes, that cost them a little bit of development for this year, but it's quite clear that they'd been on it for a long time. This is the most well-defined car of any of them. The elements that are on the floors, on the edges, the side pods, the airflow, they're going to have airflow in all the right places. And it looks like from the front end of the underfloor that they've got that sorted out well too. So I think aerodynamically, they're going to be as well or better off than anybody else. Ferrari could, with that 7% bonus that they have, they could have the slightest of edges when it comes to aero, meaning they're going to corner slightly better than anybody else, and it'll make them competitive. But I think with the drag, they'll be slow on the straights. I think the Mercedes is going to corner as well as anybody else and be just behind the Ferrari when it comes to that. And because of how sleek that body is and how much less weight they're going to be carrying and less drag they're going to have, as long as they've figured out the other elements, the tire wear, the underbody aero, you throw those pieces in there, and those are very important. And again, one more reason why this is a way too early prediction. But from what I have seen so far, Mercedes looks to be a second a lap quicker. Probably not. There's other things going on. But my oh my, does that car look fast. I'm Decathlon Gamer. Thanks for tuning in. Let's see how we do with these predictions. How far off I am. Time will certainly tell. I'll have another round of predictions once we know a lot more, though, and just before the season gets started, and especially where I think the drivers will wind up this season. Like, comment, subscribe. See you next time. Have a good one. Be safe out there. Bye for now.